Breaking right now on Morning News Now, shockwaves from the Supreme Court after it confirms a leaked draft opinion that suggests the end of Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose. Across the country, demonstrators on both sides of the decades-long abortion debate took to the streets. If the opinion holds, experts predict about half of all states could make abortion illegal.
I've been at this for over 50 years, fighting and arguing. I cannot believe that we have to do this all over again.
Roe v. Wade's bad law. We need to be defending our children, unborn or born.
In Washington, the president and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are speaking out.
It concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose.
It rocks my confidence in the court right now.
I am here because I am angry, and I am here because the United States Congress can change all of this. Yes.
Now the Supreme Court is vowing to investigate the leak, with Chief Justice Roberts calling it a singular and egregious breach of that trust that is an affront to the court and the community of public servants who work here. That bombshell leak leaving America divided this morning. Good morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're happy to have you with us, and we have team coverage for you this morning. Starting with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Bernarda Villanova. We'll break down what the end of Roe could mean. We'll also get more reaction out of D.C. from White House correspondent Carol Lee and Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa.
But first, let's go to NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley with the latest on the leak and the investigation. Julia, good to have you with us. So the Supreme Court does confirm this draft opinion is real, but what else are they saying about it? And do we know if this could have any impact at all on the final ruling?
Well, Chief Justice John Roberts did put out a statement yesterday, really grabbed the attention of the protesters and everyone who was following this closely outside the court and throughout Washington and the country. He called it a betrayal of confidences and said that this would not in any way alter the justice's process in deliberating this matter going forward. And he was very clear to say that while this was real, in other words, it was a real draft of an opinion, it was not the final. And so that leaves room that the justices could change their mind, as they do during this process. He wanted to leave that window open, Joe.
And Julia, there's now this investigation underway into who leaked the draft opinion. I mean, as we've mentioned, this is unfamiliar territory for the nation's highest court. How is this investigation even going to play out?
Well, the Chief Justice John Roberts said that he would ask the marshal of the court to conduct a leak investigation. And yes, it is true that in the past, some final opinions have leaked. In fact, the Roe v. Wade opinion actually leaked, but those were final opinions. And this seems to be catching a different heat, different ire from the court because it was a draft. That means that someone was able to shine a window into their very private process when they deliberate these matters, which is private for a reason, Joe. It's to allow justices to debate, to share the way they might present a case and persuade others to join their side. So he's asked the marshal of the court to get to the bottom of this leak. And he talked about how the people inside of the court, whether they be staffers, clerks, the entire process from top to bottom, they are part of a group of people who trust each other. And he called this a singular and egregious breach of that trust. So it seems that whomever that person or people may be who leaked this document should definitely be nervous by the Chief Justice's words.
And Julia, I mean, we expect the official ruling, the actual ruling from the Supreme Court is going to come in late June or early July. If Roe is overturned, what happens in the states that have these so-called trigger laws or other abortion restrictions on the books?
Well, Joe, a trigger law is really made that there are laws that were put in place often by legislatures who just wanted to prove a point. But the idea was that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, they would immediately be able to go into effect. These laws really run the gamut. Of course, you have the Mississippi law that was at the heart of this case that would ban abortion at 15 weeks. There are also other laws that could invade privacy of women. In other words, if someone had what looked to be a miscarriage, that person could then be investigated for a possible abortion often people who provided those abortions, whether that be a healthcare provider or someone who counseled the woman or someone who even helped the woman transport herself to the abortion clinic, those people could all be held liable under some of these trigger laws. But the bottom line is the abortion landscape across the country would look vastly different depending on what state you're in. There are some states that actually have laws on the books that would protect abortion rights regardless of the standing of Roe versus Wade.
And we know 13 states have those trigger laws in effect. All right, Julia Ainsley, thanks for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Now, for more on the political fallout of that leaked draft opinion, we want to bring in White House correspondent Carol Lee and Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa. Good morning to both of you. And Carol, I'll begin with you. So, outrage from both sides has been swift. Democrats focused a lot on the potential, of course, of Roe being overturned. Many Republicans focused on the leak and how something like this could happen. We know the president made comments on this yesterday, expressing his disappointment in this draft opinion. What's the latest out of the White House on this?
The first thing the president did, Savannah, is reaffirm his support for abortion rights. That was something the White House said he wanted to do quickly, and he came out and he did that. He also called this opinion in its draft form, that if it winds up being as it is in its final form, radical. And he took aim at the rationale for this draft opinion of overturning Roe v. Wade, essentially saying that the Supreme Court, as it's written, could then come after a whole host of other rights that Democrats care about, particularly contraception and same-sex marriage. Take a listen to the president.
The idea that it concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision in case number one. But even more, equally as profound is the rationale used. Right. And it would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question.
Now, one of the things that the president also said, Savannah, is that the White House has been preparing for this for some time. So this was not surprising in terms of where the court is likely to go on this, but nonetheless a shock. But what they've been doing is meeting with the president's Gender Policy Council, the White House counsel's office, to try to come up with options, policy responses. Obviously, there's a political strategy that they're executing here. But in terms of the policy responses, they've tried to come up with options for how to respond to various ways the court could rule on this. And the president saying in his statement that when the court ultimately hands down a ruling, quote, we will be ready.
Ali, let me bring you in here. And as we mentioned, Democrats have been outraged at the notion of overturning Roe versus Wade. First, I want to play something that Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren said just yesterday as she joined a protest outside. Take a listen.
Understand this. Understand this. I have seen the world where abortion is illegal. And we are not going back. Not ever.
Now, she went on to point out that this could be changed by the Senate. And since then, we've heard a lot about codifying Roe into law. But there are obviously quite a few obstacles to that. What are the real options there? What legal avenues are available to Democrats trying to make sure abortion stays legal nationwide? Is anything in the works?
Well, Savannah, the short but honest answer to your question is really not much. We heard Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer say yesterday that would like Democrats to vote again on the Women's Health Protection Act. This is a piece of legislation that passed in the House late last year, but it didn't make it to the Senate after Senator Manchin joined with Republicans and refused to debate this issue. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is saying he would like to bring this back to the forefront, but the circumstances haven't changed. They would not be able to do this without nuking the filibuster. And this is something that several senators have said they aren't willing to do, including Manchin, Collins, Sinema. Actually, Sinema and Manchin have even said that the filibuster is what is responsible for keeping Roe in place for all of these years. So Senate Democrats want to get this done, but they're in the same spot they've been in for months, Savannah. So this is something that's driving Democrats to do more action. However, the circumstance around it haven't changed.
Carol, let's talk now about how a pathway here could happen, which is really changing or killing the filibuster. But that's something that President Biden has been vocally against for a long time. Would this, though, push him to that point? Would the White House support that effort?
Essentially, no, Savannah. I mean, the president said he was willing to abolish the filibuster for voting rights legislation, for instance. He was asked the same question yesterday by reporters about abortion rights, and to codify the protections in Roe in legislation that he would sign into law. That is something he said he supports, but when asked if he would abolish the filibuster to get there, he said he's not ready to make that judgment yet. And so in what's happening there with his deflection is that, as Press Secretary Jen Psaki said, there's not even the votes among Democrats to do this. So what would abolishing the filibuster even do? So he's not willing to stick his neck out on a position on the filibuster to say, yes, we should get rid of it for codifying Roe v. Wade, because he doesn't have the votes even among Democrats. There are Democrats who don't want to codify Roe in legislation. And so the president's not coming out and saying we should get rid of the filibuster to do that because it would be meaningless.
Allie, now two potential allies Democrats have are Republican Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are both abortion rights supporters. But they've also come under fire from some on the left. What are the senators saying about this?
All eyes were on these two on Capitol Hill yesterday. Senator Lisa Murkowski and Collins have actually been working on a federal women's reproductive bill together. This is something that Democrats, however, aren't backing. Murkowski said yesterday that all of this puts this bill in new light. She says that there's even more of a reason to back this bill now. But listen to what else she told reporters yesterday.
Roe is still the law of the land. We don't know the direction that this decision may ultimately take, but if it goes in the direction that this leaked copy has indicated, I will just tell you that it rocks my confidence in the court right now.
Yeah, and Murkowski notably did not mention changing filibuster rules, but she also didn't mention her conversations with Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh during their confirmation process about Roe. However, Senator Susan Collins did, implying that if this draft is indeed accurate and not changed, that they might have lied to her during that conversation during their confirmation process.
Allie and Carol, thank you both so much.
Staying with the Supreme Court, let's bring in Bernarda Villalona. She is a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Bernarda, good to have you with us. So at the heart of Roe versus Wade is the issue of viability. That's the point at which a fetus could survive outside of the mother. Roe prevents states from banning abortion before that point. Now, most experts say that's around 23 or 24 weeks right now. In this leaked draft opinion, Justice Alito says it makes no sense and almost no other country has such a line. So tell us more. What's the standard that Roe set, and what are we likely to see on the state level if it's overturned?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me, especially since we're waking up in a new world for us females. So in regards to what did Roe versus Wade set out back in 1973, because now since the Supreme Court is looking to overturn a decision of over 50 years ago, Roe versus Wade established that a woman has a right to privacy in the sense that she has the right to get an abortion. However, there were still restrictions that were placed with Roe versus Wade, and that was the trimester approach, being that they separated the 3 trimesters and stating that during the first trimester that no state can impinge on the right of the woman to choose to have an abortion. However, 1993 came around with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, the Supreme Court did away with the 3 trimester approach and instead said that the state cannot place an undue burden on a woman being able to get an abortion. Where do we stand now with this draft Supreme Court decision? It still hasn't taken into effect. But what the judges are saying is that there was an egregious wrong and that we shouldn't have been getting involved from the very beginning. And what the Supreme Court is saying, pretty much washing their hands and putting it on the state after this decision comes out for them to make their own regulations as to whether a person can get an abortion. What will happen? We're going to see at least over 13 states that are going to automatically ban abortions for no matter the reason, even if you were raped or as a result of incest.
Thank you for breaking that down for us, Bernarda. Let's talk about public opinion. I mean, the most recent NBC News polling showed 71% of Americans supported keeping Roe in place. Only 8% believe abortion should be illegal without exception. How much does the court consider public opinion, especially with big cases like this?
So any judge will tell you that they will be fair and impartial in any matter, that they are independent, that they base decisions on law. And in fact, when it comes to Supreme Court justices, they have lifetime appointments, so they are not in fear of being removed from their position. However, we know that public opinion does matter because especially when these cases are filed, we have what's called amicus briefs. And those are other interested parties that are not before the court, but they submit briefs to the court to consider when deciding their decision. Because in this example of this draft opinion, even Judge Alito, he alludes to certain amicus briefs that were filed by different parties and were able to educate the court more.
All right, and before the end of this court term, we're expecting rulings on a range of other issues. We've got controversial topics like the Second Amendment, remain in Mexico policy at the border, the governor's authority to regulate greenhouse gases. We're tight on time here, but just real quickly, is there anything from this draft opinion on abortion that gives you any insight into how the court could rule on some of these other issues?
I'm going to tell you this, that after this draft opinion, I don't have faith in the court that they're going to follow landmark decisions because they have already showed us in this draft opinion that they are willing to overrule 50 years of precedent. So we're just going to have to wait and see and also be able to plan just in case things don't go your way.
And much like we have to wait and see what the actual decision is going to be in this one case that's getting so much attention. Bernarda, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Let's now get to the latest in the war in Ukraine, where the first group of evacuated civilians from that steel plant in Mariupol have finally reached safety. More than 100 people arrived at the Ukrainian-controlled town of Zaporizhia after being trapped for months. Officials say about 200 civilians are still holed up at the plant as Russian forces continue to shell it. And just this morning, the European Union has announced its sixth package of Russian sanctions. Among the proposals is a ban on Russian oil. Speaking earlier, the president of the European Commission said the Russian president must pay a, quote, high price for the war.
Putin wanted to wipe out Ukraine from the map. And he will clearly not succeed. On the contrary, Ukraine has risen in bravery and in unity. And it is his own country, Russia, that Putin is sinking. Honourable members, we want Ukraine to win this war.
NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Zaporizhia, where those steel plant evacuees arrived. Matt, good to see you. So, I mean, the world has been watching and waiting to see what was happening in Mariupol and to learn the extent of what the people there went through. So tell us what you heard from these evacuees yesterday. How did they feel finally making it to safety? And what was the situation like inside that facility?
Yeah, Joe and Savannah, we all know what the situation was like inside the facility. It was essentially underground in darkness for 2 months. And hearing those people describe it, diminishing supplies of food, restricted supplies of medicine and water, it was a really harrowing situation. And people that we've spoken with say that day to day, they just didn't know if they were ever going to make it out alive. The real issue that we keep hearing from people, and we've been interviewing them time and time again, I actually just stepped away from one, is that they all left someone there. If you were in Azovstal as a civilian, it was probably because you're the spouse, child, or parent of a soldier who now has to stay to fight. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things that we kept hearing over and over again. Last night, we spoke to a little boy, a 14-year-old, and he described having to leave his father in the plant as he was finally able to get out. And just today, we spoke with a mother who described having to leave her son. And these are all people who now are watching on the news. Now they have access to all sorts of information. So they have to watch as Russia renews its assault on the plant. And this is a really, really horrible new assault. This is one where they're really pelting this because now they're doing this under the understanding that a lot of the civilians have already left. So this is really heartbreaking for those people who now are watching this from a distance and watching as their loved ones who they can't communicate with are getting assaulted again. Guys?
Matt, I also want to ask you about another city, Lviv in the west. As we've talked a lot about, it's considered a safer part of the country. But last night, Russian missiles did target the city. What can you tell us about that attack?
Yeah, it looks as though that attacked some power plants and cut off power to the city. You know, this is one of those things we keep seeing time and time again. Vladimir Putin and his army has withdrawn from the western part of the country and from other parts of the country where their military failed, surprising the world with their failure. And now, instead, it looks as though he's reminding these little drops of bombs throughout the western part of the country, sort of putting everybody on notice, telling Ukrainians that there is nowhere that they are safe, even if they seek refuge in this city, Lviv, as you just described. It's a city that up until now, well, still now, is considered a place where people who are displaced by war, where I am in the east and other places can go. It's a jumping off point to Hungary and Poland and other points in Western Europe. And now they're still bombarding it. They're still hearing air raid sirens throughout the city. Now there was electricity that was cut off. It's a very dangerous situation, and it's one that just goes to show that Vladimir Putin seems to want to terrorize the civilian population of Ukraine.
Matt, we're also looking at this latest package of sanctions from the European Union, which plans a ban on Russian oil. Walk us through some of the proposals included here, and are these measures likely to be approved?
Yeah, it looks as though they're likely to be approved because now the thing that really has changed is Germany. Germany's decision to really twist the screw on Russia and Vladimir Putin. You know, Germany, as we know, has been an outlier. It's been reluctant to really to really pressure Moscow up until now because of their own economic interests and because of the political situation there. Olaf Scholz is a brand new chancellor. But now it looks as though Germany is changing their tune because of the overwhelming pressure from the populations throughout the world to restrict Russia. And as we heard from Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, not just to stop their fighting in Ukraine, but to actually weaken Russia so they can't do that anymore. So these proposals that we're seeing from the European Union, they would essentially put the Sberbank, the largest of Russia's state-owned banks, off of the SWIFT system, along with, as you mentioned, that oil. They would try to gradually wean the European Union off of Russian oil. That would be a huge geostrategic and geoeconomic shift. Guys?
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you so much.
Let's bring in Jameel Jaffer now for more on the situation in Ukraine. Jameel is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. He's also the former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush. Good to have you with us again. So let's start with that proposal by the European Union to ban Russian oil imports in its next round of sanctions. Why do you think it's taken until now for the EU to propose this ban? And do you think something like that could actually influence Russia?
Well, Joe, certainly could influence Russia. Oil is about 45% of the Russian economy. Now, the challenge for the Europeans, of course, is that they buy a lot of Russian oil. We're talking 3 to 3.5 million barrels a day. We're talking, about $400 million in daily purchases. And so it's a real challenge for the Europeans to cut this supply off. They've got to get alternate sources, and without the U.S. producing a significant amount of exports, which we aren't today, they're looking at places like Iran and Venezuela, not great options for the United States or our allies either, but something to think about. The other issue, Joe, as you well know, is this issue of gas. And today, even though there are some limitations on Russian gas coming to Europe and the payment of rubles to them, the Europeans have worked out a sort of a methodology where they pay Gazprom Bank, a Russian bank, in euros. They transfer to rubles. The Russians get paid anyhow. And so that Russian gas keeps flowing to Europe. That's another huge area where Russia has a stranglehold on our allies because of their control of these supplies to Europe.
Jameel, let's talk about that positive news out of Mariupol. They're successfully evacuating some of the people who are still trapped there. I mean, the fact that humanitarian organizations are on the ground there, does that signal any kind of shift in Russia's strategy to capture the city? Is anything changing here?
Well, Joe, I'd like to say it is, and we've seen a small number of civilians, as you heard from Matt, finally getting out of Mariupol, the Azov steel plant there. Unfortunately, Russians continue to target civilian targets. We're talking about schools, we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about apartment buildings. We just heard about what happened in Lviv. I mean, it is a real disaster, and these are actual war crimes ongoing currently. And so it's unfortunate. While this is a good sign, and we finally see civilians being evacuated under a Russian-approved humanitarian mission by the UN, it's very little at a time when there are still hundreds still holed up in that Azov steel plant in Mariupol.
And Jameel, quickly, I want to ask you about this last point. Yesterday, we saw President Biden visit a Lockheed Martin facility. It's producing those Javelin anti-tank missiles. It's one of the most important weapons the Ukrainians have to fight back against the Russians. I mean, quickly here, what message does the president's visit send as he tries to push to get more aid, that massive package for Ukraine passed?
Well, sir, the president has doubled and tripled down on American military supplies to Ukraine, asking Congress for $33 billion on top of the $13.5 billion we've already provided. We're sending those Javelins. We're sending Stinger anti-air missiles. We're sending now howitzers and the like. And so we're really arming the Ukrainians at a really effective level. The question is, can they hold off the Russians without actual direct involvement by the U.S. military or Europe? That's going to be a tough one. The Russians are in for the long haul. Unfortunately, Joe, I worry this gets worse before it gets better.
Jameel Jaffer, thanks so much for your analysis this morning. We appreciate it. Time to get a check on your morning news now weather.
Which means Michelle Grossman is with us. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. And once again, we are tracking severe weather today, tomorrow, and also on Friday. So 9 million people at risk today. We do have an enhanced risk. That's where you see the orange. We're looking at the possibility, once again, of very large hail. Also winds gusting up to 70 miles per hour, and also some strong tornadoes can't be ruled out. That is through tonight. So the slight risk anywhere from Oklahoma all the way to Texas. Now, as we move throughout Thursday, we're seeing this area expand. So now we're talking about 15 million at risk, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Once again, hail and also the chance for some tornadoes. So anywhere from Missouri through Arkansas, also down to Oklahoma and into Texas once again. And we're going to look at the chance of some very heavy rainfall. The bullseye with Tulsa down to Texarkana, Dallas as well. We could see isolated amounts up to 6 inches of rain. That could cause some problems in terms of flooding, even some flash flooding. That's really dangerous when it comes to weather. So we do have a flash flood watch, and that's because we're looking at that excessive rainfall, or at least we're concerned for that. Anywhere through Kansas to Missouri, portions of Arkansas, also Oklahoma, into the northern part of Texas. That's one thing we're going to watch through Friday. Otherwise, we're looking at the southwest, another critical risk for some fire weather. It's really warm, it's dry. We're looking at gusty winds once again and really low relative humidity. So we'll be watching that today and also tomorrow. Severe weather in the central and southern plains. And look at the East Coast. You need the umbrellas you head out today because we're looking at a cold front moving off the coast today. But before it does that, it's bringing some showers to the north and parts of New England. And then on the southern end, we're looking at the chance of some thunderstorms. Now, as we go throughout Thursday, we have some Pacific Northwest rain moving into the country here. That's going to be our next big storm. But we're also looking at that severe weather moving off to the east. So anywhere in the lower Mississippi Valley, the mid-Mississippi Valley is where we're looking at that severe weather. We're going to dry it, though, out in the northeast. As we go throughout the weekend, by Friday, more rain and wind in the Pacific Northwest. Warm sunshine finally in the middle of the country. It looks like we're going to be dry, but wet in the east. Anywhere from the Great Lakes all the way to the northeast, down to the southeast, where we're going to be looking at showers. Even where you see that yellow, it's going to be a little bit more moderate rainfall. Back to you guys.
Lots of umbrella sales.
Yeah, right.
All right. Thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.